Hikaru Watanabe was a loser, and there was absolutely no sugarcoating that fact. At 18 years old, he'd been rejected by every single girl he'd ever confessed to, 5 times and counting, each rejection more humiliating than the last. His classmates had given him a nickname that stuck like glue, Forever Alone Hikaru, whispered behind his back in the hallways and shouted across the cafeteria whenever he dared to sit near the popular kids. He wasn't ugly exactly, just painfully average in every conceivable way. Average height, average build, average grades that neither impressed nor disappointed anyone. His dark, messy hair stuck up in odd directions no matter how much he tried to tame it, and his wardrobe consisted entirely of the same black t-shirt and gray jeans he wore day after day, because fashion was a foreign language he'd never bothered to learn. While other guys his age were dating, partying, and living their best high school lives, Hikaru spent his Friday nights alone in his tiny apartment playing dating simulator games on his computer, pretending pixel girlfriends could fill the void of loneliness that gnawed at his chest. It was a pathetic existence, and deep down he knew it. But knowing something and changing it were two very different things. Even his childhood friend Asuka, the only girl who bothered being nice to him anymore, clearly saw him as nothing more than a harmless friend she pitied rather than someone she could ever actually like romantically. She was kind, always greeting him with that bright smile that made his heart ache, but he'd learned long ago not to mistake kindness for interest. The friend zone was a prison with walls so high he couldn't even see the top anymore. But everything changed on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning when Hikaru woke up to something that would transform his pathetic existence forever. A glowing blue screen floated directly in front of his face, hovering in midair like some kind of augmented reality interface pulled straight from a video game. He rubbed his eyes violently, convinced he was still dreaming or perhaps finally losing his mind from isolation, but the screen remained stubbornly solid and real. The text displayed on the holographic interface read in bold letters, "Bro system activated. Mission: build the ultimate harem." Hikaru's jaw dropped open as more text appeared below, outlining what seemed like an impossible fantasy. Complete quests to unlock special skills that will help you attract women. Current skills, none. Current harem members, 0. A quest notification materialized before he could fully process the absurdity of what he was seeing. Beginner quest. Talk to 3 different girls today. Reward, Charm Aura Level 1. Failure. Penalty, system deactivation, and permanent removal. Time limit 24 hours. Below the quest description, a countdown timer began ticking down from 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. Hikaru's heart pounded in his chest as reality sank in. This was either the most elaborate hallucination he'd ever experienced, or somehow impossibly, he'd been given a second chance at life. The countdown continued its relentless march towards 0, and he realized with growing panic that he had less than a day to complete what seemed like an impossible task for someone like him. 3 conversations with girls. For anyone else, that might be easy. For Forever Alone Hikaru, it felt like climbing Mount Everest in flip-flops. But what choice did he have? The system had appeared for a reason, and if there was even the slightest chance this was real, he couldn't afford to waste it. Hikaru threw off his blankets, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, and began getting ready for school with more purpose than he'd felt in years. The morning at Sakura High School started exactly as it always did for Hikaru, which meant it started terribly. He arrived at his locker to find it covered in sticky notes, each one featuring crude drawings and mocking messages about his perpetual single status. "Still no girlfriend, Hikaru?" One read in bright pink marker. "Maybe try 2D waifus instead," suggested another with a badly drawn anime girl. He peeled them off quickly, cheeks burning with familiar shame, trying to ignore the snickering from the group of students watching nearby. He knew who was behind the sticky notes. It was always the same crowd that gathered near the third-floor vending machines every morning, a rotating cast of bored students who found his misery entertaining. He'd stopped trying to figure out which specific person started it months ago. It didn't matter. What mattered was getting through the day without adding a 6th rejection to his growing collection. As he trudged toward his first period class, Hikaru passed by the popular crowd gathered near the windows, their laughter loud and carefree in a way his had never been. At the center of the group stood Emiko Fujimoto, the blonde student council president whose rejection 3 months ago still stung like an open wound. She was beautiful in that effortless way some people were, with perfect hair that caught the morning sunlight and an aura of confidence that attracted followers like moths to a flame. When she'd turned him down, she hadn't even bothered to soften the blow, simply stating flatly that she would never date someone as boring and ordinary as him before walking away without a backward glance. Now, Emiko was laughing at something her boyfriend had whispered in her ear. The boyfriend in question was Ryota, the captain of the basketball team, tall and athletic with the kind of easy confidence that Hikaru had spent 18 years failing to develop. Ryota's arm was draped possessively around Emiko's shoulders, and she seemed completely comfortable there, leaning into him with the relaxed familiarity of two people who'd been together long enough to stop trying to impress each other. Hikaru felt his stomach twist with envy and longing as he hurried past, keeping his eyes down to avoid making eye contact that might invite more mockery. The blue quest notification flickered at the edge of his vision, a constant reminder of his mission. 3 conversations with girls before the day ended. The problem was that talking to girls terrified him more than public speaking, spiders, and heights combined. His tongue would tie itself into knots, his palms would sweat rivers, and somehow his brain would shut down completely, leaving him standing there like a malfunctioning robot, trying desperately to remember how human interaction worked. But the countdown was merciless, already down to 23 hours and 45 minutes, and failure meant losing the system forever. During homeroom, Hikaru sat in his usual spot at the back corner of the classroom, the desk by the window that let him stare outside and pretend he was anywhere else. His homeroom teacher droned on about upcoming exams while Hikaru's mind raced with increasingly desperate plans. Maybe he could ask someone for directions even though he knew exactly where everything was. Maybe he could compliment someone's outfit and hope they responded before he died of embarrassment. Maybe he could just give up now and accept his fate as forever alone Hikaru for the rest of his miserable life. No, he thought, shaking his head firmly. He'd been given an impossible gift, and he refused to waste it out of cowardice. When the bell rang for the break between classes, Hikaru took a deep breath, steeled his nerves, and approached the first girl he could find who didn't look actively hostile toward his existence. Miku Tanaka sat alone at her desk, headphones on, completely absorbed in whatever music was playing as she doodled in the margins of her notebook. She was cute in a quiet, understated way, with short brown hair and round glasses that made her look studious and approachable. Hikaru had never really talked to her before despite being in the same class for 2 years, but she seemed like a safer bet than approaching any of the girls who actively knew and disliked him. He cleared his throat nervously as he approached her desk, his heart hammering so hard he worried she might hear it. Excuse me, Miku, he managed to stammer out, his voice cracking embarrassingly on her name. She pulled out one earbud and looked up at him with mild curiosity rather than the disgust he'd half expected. I was wondering if you could help me with the math homework from yesterday. I'm really struggling with problem 15. It was a lie, of course. He'd already finished the homework, but it was the only excuse he could think of that didn't sound completely insane. To his amazement, Miku smiled, a small, genuine smile that made his chest feel slightly less tight with anxiety. Sure, no problem, she said, pulling out her completed worksheet. This one was tricky. You have to factor it first before solving for x. As she explained the problem, Hikaru found himself relaxing incrementally, the rigid tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. She was patient and kind, not once making him feel stupid for asking, and by the time she finished her explanation, he'd almost forgotten about the quest entirely. Then a notification flashed before his eyes, visible only to him. Progress. 1 out of 3 conversations completed. Continue the mission. Emboldened by his first success, Hikaru thanked Miku profusely and headed toward his second target. During lunch period, he found himself in the library, a quiet sanctuary where students went either to study or to hide from the social chaos of the cafeteria. He spotted a girl sitting alone at one of the corner tables, surrounded by a fortress of thick textbooks and looking frazzled as she flipped frantically through pages. Gathering his courage once more, Hikaru approached and offered quietly, You look like you could use some help. What are you studying? The girl glanced up, her tired eyes widening slightly in surprise that someone had actually spoken to her. It's chemistry, she admitted with a heavy sigh. I have a test next period and I'm completely lost on this whole unit about molecular bonds. Hikaru happened to be decent at chemistry, one of the few subjects where his grades actually rose above average, and he spent the next 20 minutes explaining the concepts in simpler terms than their textbook used. The girl, whose name he learned was Ayumi, seemed genuinely grateful, thanking him repeatedly and even smiling at one of his terrible jokes about atoms losing electrons and being positive about it. When he left the library 15 minutes later, another notification appeared. Progress. 2 out of 3 conversations completed. Final conversation required. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of anxiety as Hikaru searched for his third target, the clock in his peripheral vision counting down relentlessly. 22 hours remained, then 21, then 20. Finally, as the last class of the day began winding down, he spotted his opportunity. The girl who sat in front of him in English class dropped her pencil, which rolled back toward his desk, and without thinking too hard about it, Hikaru picked it up and tapped her on the shoulder. "You dropped this," he said simply, holding out the pencil. She turned around, took it with a quiet, "Thank you," and then surprised him by adding, "Hey, did you understand what Sensei was saying about the essay structure? I'm totally confused." They spent the remaining 5 minutes of class discussing the assignment, and when the final bell rang, a triumphant notification exploded across Hikaru's vision in golden letters. Beginner quest complete. Reward, Charm Aura, Level 1 has been unlocked and activated. The change was subtle at first, so subtle that Hikaru almost didn't notice it happening. A warm, tingling sensation spread through his body, starting from his chest and radiating outward to his fingertips and toes, like he'd just stepped into a perfectly heated bath after a freezing winter day. He looked down at his hands, half expecting to see them glowing with some visible aura, but they appeared completely normal. What wasn't normal was the way people started reacting to him. As Hikaru walked down the hallway toward his locker after the final bell, something felt different in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Students who normally wouldn't give him a second glance turned their heads as he passed, their eyes tracking his movement with newfound interest. A group of girls he'd never spoken to before stopped their conversation mid-sentence to watch him walk by, whispering among themselves with expressions that looked almost appreciative. Hikaru caught his reflection in the window of the science classroom and paused, studying himself critically for any visible changes. He looked exactly the same as he had this morning. Same messy dark hair, same rumpled black t-shirt, same average everything. Yet somehow, impossibly, people were looking at him differently, as if overnight he'd transformed from invisible background character to someone worth noticing. The real proof came when he reached his locker. Emiko Fujimoto, the girl who had rejected him so callously just 3 months ago, was standing nearby talking with a few friends, but she seemed distracted and unhappy in a way he hadn't noticed before. As Hikaru opened his locker, he overheard snippets of conversation. Something about Ryota canceling plans again, about never having time for her anymore. Then Emiko's eyes met his, and instead of the cold dismissal he'd expected, something different crossed her face. She excused herself from her friends and walked over to him, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume. "Hey, Hikaru," she said, and the friendly, casual tone of her voice made his brain short-circuit momentarily. This was the same girl who'd told him he was too boring to even consider dating. Now she was looking at him with a smile that seemed almost shy, her cheeks slightly pink as she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I was thinking, we have that group project coming up in history class, right? Maybe we could be partners and work on it together? We could meet at the library after school tomorrow if you're free." Hikaru's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air as he struggled to form coherent words. A notification appeared in his vision. Romance detection activated, Emiko Fujimoto interest level, 15% and rising. The implication hit him like a truck. The girl who'd rejected him was now actively showing interest, and something about her seemed different too, a little less certain of herself, a little more searching for something. He filed that thought away for later. He managed to stammer out an acceptance of her offer, trying desperately not to sound as shocked as he felt, and Emiko beamed at him before heading back to her friends with an extra bounce in her step. As soon as she was out of earshot, Hikaru leaned heavily against his locker, his legs feeling suddenly weak. The system was real. The impossible was happening. His life was actually changing, but the surprises didn't end there. As Hikaru headed toward the school gates, planning to go straight home and process everything that had happened, A familiar voice called out behind him. "Hikaru, wait up!" He turned to find Asuka jogging toward him, her brown ponytail bouncing with each step. Her sports uniform suggesting she'd just come from track practice. Asuka Ishikawa had been his friend since elementary school, the one constant presence in his life who'd never abandoned him even when everyone else had written him off as a hopeless loser. She was pretty in an athletic, energetic way, with warm brown eyes that always seemed to sparkle with enthusiasm and a smile that could brighten even his darkest days. For years, Hikaru had harbored secret feelings for her, but he'd buried them deep down, convinced that confessing would only ruin the one genuine friendship he had left. Now Asuka caught up to him, slightly out of breath but grinning widely. "Hey, I was wondering if you wanted to grab food at that ramen place near your apartment. I'm starving after practice, and I figured we could catch up. We haven't hung out properly in like 2 weeks because I've been so busy with training." As she spoke, another notification appeared. Romance detection activated. Asuka Ishikawa interest level, 30% and rising. 30%? Hikaru's mind reeled. Had Asuka always felt something for him that he'd been too blind to notice? Or was the charm aura making her see him differently too? Either way, he wasn't about to refuse. They walked together to the ramen shop, falling into their usual easy conversation. But Hikaru couldn't help noticing the small differences in how Asuka acted around him now. She stood closer than usual when they talked, laughed a little too enthusiastically at his mediocre jokes, and kept finding excuses to lightly touch his arm when making a point. As they ate their ramen in the cozy little restaurant, steam rising from their bowls and filling the air with delicious savory smells, Hikaru's mind was racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. In less than one day, he'd gone from forever alone Hikaru to someone who apparently had 2 different girls showing interest in him. The bro system had delivered on its promise spectacularly, and this was only the beginning. A new notification appeared as he slurped down his noodles. New quest available. Complete 5 acts of kindness for girls within 3 days. Reward, perfect gentleman skill. Accept quest? Hikaru mentally selected yes without hesitation. He was done being a loser. He was done being invisible. Nothing was going to stop him now. The next morning, something unexpected happened that changed the Emiko situation entirely. Hikaru arrived at school early to find a small crowd gathered near the school entrance, students whispering and pointing at a scene unfolding by the gates. Emiko stood facing Ryota, her arms crossed and her jaw set in that particular way people hold themselves when they're trying not to cry in public. Hikaru couldn't hear the conversation from where he stood, but the body language told the whole story. Ryota was dismissive, checking his phone while she spoke, occasionally shrugging with the casual cruelty of someone who no longer bothered pretending to care. When Emiko reached out to touch his arm, he subtly stepped back, just enough to make it clear he didn't want her to. The message was obvious even from a distance. The conversation ended with Ryota walking away toward his teammates without looking back, and Emiko standing alone at the gate for a long moment, staring after him with an expression that mixed hurt and exhausted resignation. Then she seemed to remember she was at school where people could see her, and her face shifted back into the composed, confident mask she always wore. Hikaru watched all of this from a distance, and a notification appeared in his vision. Observe. Emiko Fujimoto's relationship is ending. She is vulnerable but hiding it. The charm aura is amplifying her existing dissatisfaction with Ryota. Opportunity window increasing. By the end of the day, the breakup was confirmed, spreading through the school grapevine with the speed gossip always traveled. Ryota had ended things. He'd apparently been interested in someone else for weeks and had simply waited for a convenient moment to make it official. Emiko, who everyone had assumed was the most secure person in school, was suddenly single for the first time anyone could remember. When she appeared at the library that afternoon for their study session, she looked tired in a way that expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. But she smiled when she saw Hikaru, a genuine one rather than the practiced social smile she usually deployed, and sat down across from him like someone relieved to be somewhere where nobody was watching her reaction to her own life falling apart. They worked on the history project for an hour, and when Hikaru offered to buy her a coffee from the vending machine because she looked like she needed one, she accepted with a softness in her eyes that he'd never seen there before. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're surprisingly easy to be around, Hikaru." It wasn't a confession, but the notification that appeared suggested it was something. Emiko Fujimoto interest level, 15 to 25%. Emotional availability increasing. The perfect gentleman quest turned out to be easier than Hikaru expected, though not without its awkward moments that made him question his sanity. The system defined acts of kindness broadly enough that simple gestures counted toward his total, which was fortunate because grand romantic gestures were well beyond his current skill level. His first act of kindness happened the very next morning on his walk to school. An elderly woman was struggling to carry multiple heavy grocery bags up the steps to her apartment building, her arms shaking with the effort and her face red from exertion. The old Hikaru would have walked right past, too absorbed in his own misery to notice other people's struggles. But the new version stopped immediately and offered to help carry the bags up 3 flights of stairs to her door. The woman thanked him profusely, insisting he take some fresh mochi she'd just bought as payment. And as he munched on the sweet treat while continuing to school, a notification appeared. Perfect gentleman quest progress. 1 out of 5 acts of kindness completed. Reward preview. This skill will grant you instinctive knowledge of the perfect thing to say in any social situation with women. Eliminating awkward silences and misunderstandings, that sounded incredibly useful, and Hikaru found himself actively looking for opportunities to help throughout the day. His second act came during first period when Miku dropped her entire pencil case, sending pens and erasers scattering across the classroom floor. Without being asked, Hikaru got down on his hands and knees to help gather everything, even crawling under desks to retrieve the items that had rolled into hard-to-reach places. Miku blushed prettily as she thanked him, her cheeks turning a lovely shade of pink that made her look even cuter behind her round glasses, and Hikaru noticed her interest level notification had appeared. Romance detection, Miku Tanaka interest level, 25%. The charm aura was doing its job even when he wasn't actively trying to attract anyone. His third act happened in the cafeteria during lunch, when he noticed a first-year student being harassed by a group of older boys who were tossing her lunchbox back and forth, keeping it just out of her reach while she jumped pathetically trying to grab it. The old Hikaru would have looked away, too afraid of confrontation to intervene, but something had shifted in him. "Give it back," Hikaru said firmly, stepping between the girl and her tormentors, his voice carrying more authority than he knew he had. The boys, surprised that someone was actually standing up to them, hesitated just long enough for Hikaru to snatch the lunchbox from the ringleader's hands and return it to its rightful owner. The bullies grumbled something about him being a buzzkill before wandering off. The first-year girl looked up at Hikaru with stars in her eyes. "Thank you so much, senpai," she exclaimed, clutching her recovered lunchbox to her chest. "Those guys have been bothering me for weeks, but everyone just ignores it." "You're so brave. What's your name?" "I'm Riko Suzuki, first-year Class B." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Hikaru couldn't help but smile at her genuine gratitude. Another notification appeared. Romance detection. Riko Suzuki interest level, 40%. Apparently, being a hero was attractive. His fourth act of kindness came after school when he found Ms. Ayame Nakamura, the young English teacher who'd started working at the school just that year, struggling to carry a massive stack of papers and textbooks to her car while juggling her bag and coffee cup. She was only 25, young enough that students sometimes mistook her for a senior, and she'd always been genuinely kind to Hikaru in class, the sort of teacher who actually noticed when a student was struggling and quietly offered help without making a production of it. He offered to carry the heavy items for her, and during their walk to the parking lot, they chatted about the novel they were reading in class. Ms. Ayame's face lit up talking about literature in a way that was different from her classroom voice, more animated and personal, sharing opinions rather than curriculum. She was clearly passionate about books in the same way a person loved their oldest friend. As they reached her car and she thanked him warmly, Ms. Ayame added something quietly. "You know, I moved here knowing absolutely no one, and some days it gets quite lonely. It's easy to forget that small conversations matter." She said it lightly, not fishing for sympathy, just sharing a truth. Hikaru found himself genuinely moved by the admission, and said something real back about how he understood that feeling better than most people might think. She smiled warmly at him as she drove away, and the notification that appeared made his heart skip a beat. Romance detection, Ayame Nakamura interest level, 20%. Note: teacher-student relationships are complicated and ethically complex. Proceed with care. The fifth and final act came when Emiko approached him the next day, looking frustrated because her locker had jammed shut. Hikaru remembered that this particular locker had a trick to it, and within seconds he had it open for her. Emiko looked at him with undisguised admiration. "You're really good at solving problems," she said. "I've been noticing how helpful you've been to people lately. It's genuinely attractive when someone does that without making a big deal of it." Her interest level jumped from 25% to 35% right before his eyes. And then a much larger notification appeared. Perfect Gentleman quest complete. Skill unlocked, Perfect Gentleman. You now instinctively know the perfect thing to say in any social situation with women. The Perfect Gentleman skill proved its worth immediately. The next day, walking to school with Asuka, Hikaru found conversation flowing effortlessly, where before he would have fumbled through awkward silences. When Asuka commented that he seemed different lately, more confident, the Perfect Gentleman skill provided the ideal response. "I guess I finally decided to stop letting fear hold me back. Life's too short to stay in my comfort zone forever, right?" Asuka's eyes widened slightly, and her interest level jumped from 30 to 45% as she looked away quickly, a blush creeping up her neck. "Yeah, you're right about that," she mumbled. The chemistry between them was changing, evolving into something neither had quite acknowledged yet. A new quest notification interrupted his thoughts. New quest, Cooking Mastery. Prepare a homemade meal for someone and have them genuinely enjoy it. Reward, Cooking Mastery skill. Time limit, 3 days. Hikaru accepted immediately. He wasn't a terrible cook. Years of living alone had forced him to learn basic survival skills in the kitchen, but he wasn't particularly skilled either. This would be a challenge. That evening, Hikaru spent hours researching recipes online, watching tutorial videos, and practicing techniques in his tiny kitchen. Failed attempts littered the counter: overcooked rice, tamagoyaki that fell apart, chicken that came out dry. But he kept trying, driven by a stubbornness he didn't know he possessed, until the system gave him something worth being stubborn about. By midnight, he'd created something he was genuinely proud of. A traditional Japanese bento box with fluffy rice, perfectly rolled tamagoyaki, glazed teriyaki chicken, and carefully arranged vegetables. The presentation wasn't professional, but it was made with real care and effort, which was more than he'd put into anything in a long time. The next day, he brought the bento to school and found Asuka sitting alone on the roof during lunch, her usual spot when she needed quiet time away from her track team friends. "I made you lunch," Hikaru said simply, presenting the bento box with slightly shaking hands. "I remembered you mentioned you didn't have time to pack one this morning because of your early practice." Asuka's eyes went wide with surprise. "You made this for me?" Her voice was soft, touched in a way that made Hikaru's heart squeeze painfully. She picked up the chopsticks and took a bite of the tamagoyaki, and her expression transformed into one of pure bliss. "This is amazing," she exclaimed, immediately taking another bite. "Hikaru, this is seriously really good. When did you learn to cook like this?" She devoured the entire bento with genuine enthusiasm, and by the time she finished, Hikaru had 2 notifications waiting. Cooking Mastery quest complete. Skill unlocked. Everything you cook will now taste extraordinary. And then, Romance Detection, Asuka Ishikawa. Interest level, 60%. She's falling for you, but Hikaru didn't have long to appreciate it before a quest appeared marked in urgent red text. Emergency quest, Protector mode. A girl is in danger. Reach her location and intervene within 60 seconds. Failure, loss of all current skills. Reward, Protector mode activated permanently. A map appeared in his vision showing Emiko's location in a secluded area behind the school gymnasium where students rarely went. 60 seconds. He didn't think, didn't hesitate, just ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, his legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled speed as he rounded corners and burst through doors. He found Emiko pressed against the wall behind the gym, cornered by an older man in his 20s who definitely didn't belong on school grounds. Emiko looked terrified, her eyes wide and searching for escape routes that didn't exist. "Leave her alone!" Hikaru shouted. The man turned, irritation crossing his face, But before he could respond, Hikaru felt the system surge through his body. His muscles suddenly felt stronger, his reactions faster. His fear transformed into cold determination. He grabbed the man's shoulder and spun him around, putting himself between the creep and Emiko. "I said leave her alone. Now get out of here before I call the police." Something in Hikaru's presence, enhanced by the system, made the man take a step back and reconsider his options. He stalked off with a muttered curse, and the timer in Hikaru's vision froze at 4 seconds remaining. As soon as the threat disappeared, Emiko stared at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. A mixture of relief, admiration, and something deeper that made his breath catch. Then she threw her arms around him in a tight hug, burying her face in his shoulder as her body trembled with the aftermath of fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's been following me for a week. I didn't know what to do." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, beautiful and scared in equal measure. "You just appeared out of nowhere. You're always just there when I need someone." The notifications came quickly. "Emergency quest complete. Protector mode unlocked." And then, "Romance detection. Emiko Fujimoto interest level, 65%. She's falling hard." When Hikaru walked Emiko back toward the main building, she stayed close to him the whole way, and she didn't let go of his arm until they reached the crowded hallways. By the next day, the story had spread through the school, and Hikaru's reputation underwent a complete transformation. With his social status transformed, Hikaru found himself noticed in ways that opened new doors. Natsumi Kobayashi was the first of those doors. She was a genius, everyone knew that, with the highest grades in the entire school. But she was painfully shy and had exactly 0 friends because her intelligence intimidated most students, who found it easier to mock what they didn't understand. She sat in the back of the library every day, surrounded by advanced mathematics textbooks, working through problems with the quiet focus of someone who had learned not to expect company. Hikaru noticed her struggling one afternoon not with math, but with their literature assignment. Her logical mind couldn't grasp the abstract concepts and symbolism their teacher loved assigning. It was like asking a calculator to write poetry. The analytical framework that made her exceptional at mathematics became a blind spot for anything requiring emotional interpretation. Using his perfect gentleman skill, Hikaru explained the material in ways that connected to her strengths, drawing parallels between narrative structure and mathematical proofs, showing her that themes in literature followed patterns just as reliable as equations if you knew how to look. He watched the moment understanding click behind her eyes, and it was genuinely satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with the system. They met in the library 3 days in a row, and somewhere in those sessions, the conversation stopped being only about literature. Natsumi opened up slowly, like a window that hadn't been opened in years, talking about what it was like to grow up being the smartest person in the room and how that wasn't the advantage everyone assumed it to be. People stopped trying to connect with you. They either wanted something from you or they left you alone. On the 3rd day, Natsumi confessed her feelings with a stammering speech that was simultaneously adorable and heartbreaking in its sincerity. "I know I'm not like other girls," she admitted, her face burning red behind her glasses. "I'm awkward and weird, and I spend all my time reading instead of being social, but you're the first person who's ever really understood how I think. And I think I'm falling in love with you, Hikaru." The perfect gentleman's skill provided the ideal response. He took her hand gently and told her that her intelligence and uniqueness were what made her special, not flaws to be ashamed of, that the world needed people who thought differently, and that anyone who couldn't see that wasn't paying attention. Natsumi's interest level jumped to 75%, and the system officially recognized her as harem member number 3. Marina Kawasaki was the complete opposite of Natsumi in every visible way. Loud, social, confident to the point of arrogance. With bleached blonde hair and a tan, she maintained year-round and a reputation for being untouchable. She was surrounded by a posse of equally fashionable friends who treated school like their personal runway. Marina had noticed Hikaru weeks ago, back when he was still forever alone Hikaru. But back then, her interest had been purely as a source of amusement. Now she saw him differently, and she didn't pretend otherwise. She sat down across from him uninvited during lunch one day, with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. "You've been making quite the impression lately," she said, watching his reaction with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Saving Emiko, helping that shy genius with her homework, standing up for a first year. "It's kinda hot, not gonna lie." She twirled a strand of bleached hair around one finger. "Most guys just perform being good. You actually do it." Over the following week, Marina inserted herself into Hikaru's life with the determination of a force of nature, appearing at his side between classes, dragging him to lunch with her friend group, texting him constantly. Her approach kept him constantly off balance, which he suspected was deliberate. But Hikaru was paying attention to more than the performance. He noticed the moments when Marina's confidence flickered. Small and fast but real, when someone made a comment about her academic performance, when her friends laughed at something she clearly didn't find funny but joined in anyway, when she thought nobody was watching and her face settled into something quieter and less certain. One afternoon, he simply asked her, directly and without making a production of it, what she actually wanted to do with her life beyond the persona she was building so carefully. Marina stared at him for a long moment, clearly calculating whether this was some kind of trap. It wasn't. He was genuinely asking. She told him about wanting to work in fashion design. Not modeling or being in front of cameras, but creating. The actual craft of it. She talked about it with a technical specificity that revealed she'd studied the subject seriously and privately, away from friends who would have found it either impressive or threatening. When she finished, she looked almost embarrassed, like she'd said too much. "That's real," Hikaru said. "That's who you actually are." Marina's walls came down somewhere in the conversation that followed, and her interest level climbed to 65% by the time she officially became harem member number 4. The situation with Miss Ayame developed slowly and carefully, which was appropriate given its complexity. Their interactions had continued after the afternoon Hikaru carried her books. Small moments around the edges of the school day, a brief conversation after class about the novel they were reading, Hikaru staying late to help organize a classroom activity, Ms. Ayame making a point of recommending books she thought he'd specifically like based on their previous conversations. Ms. Ayame was precisely aware, of how inappropriate her growing feelings were. She was a professional who took her responsibilities seriously, and she pushed back against what she felt with real effort. She increased the professional distance during class. She stopped lingering in conversations. She redirected discussions that felt like they were drifting somewhere they shouldn't go. But the charm aura made distance harder than it should have been. And more than that, Hikaru had become someone she genuinely respected, which was different from what she'd expected from a student who'd been invisible before. He listened. He was honest. He asked real questions and gave real answers. Those qualities were attractive in ways that had nothing to do with the supernatural. It all came to a head when Hikaru stayed late one evening to help her organize the English department's storage room. In the cramped space surrounded by boxes of old textbooks, Ms. Ayame finally admitted what had been building between them. "I've thought a lot about whether to say this," she began carefully. "I know exactly what my responsibilities are, and I know how this situation is supposed to work. You're my student. I'm supposed to be the adult in the room." She met his eyes. "But Hikaru, I'd be dishonest if I pretended I didn't feel something. I'm choosing to be honest with you about that because I think you deserve honesty, and because not saying it was starting to feel like its own kind of dishonesty." Hikaru's response was guided by the perfect gentleman skill, but came from something genuine as well. He acknowledged what she'd said with the seriousness it deserved, confirmed that he felt something too, and suggested that they honor both their feelings and the situation they were actually in. He had a few months left at school. Those months mattered. What came after them could be different. Ms. Ayame looked at him with something close to relief. "You're remarkably mature for 18, she said quietly. "And that's part of the problem, isn't it?" But she smiled when she said it. Her interest level settled at 55%. Held in careful balance by two people who'd decided to wait for the right time rather than ignore what they felt. The school trip to Kyoto came 3 weeks into Hikaru's transformed life. 3 days of touring historical sites and staying at a traditional inn in the hills above the old city. Shio Yamamoto had been dating his rival Shota Taniguchi since the beginning of the school year, a pairing that looked perfect from the outside and was apparently something quite different from the inside. Hikaru noticed the gap between appearance and reality. On the first evening, when the class gathered for dinner at the inn, Shota sat with his circle of friends at one end of the long table, and Chio sat beside him looking like she was present in body only. When she tried to include herself in the conversation, Shota would answer briefly and then turn back to his friends. When she reached for his hand under the table, he didn't quite take it, leaving hers there for a moment before shifting away under the pretense of reaching for something. It was the kind of behavior that's hard to call out, because each individual moment is technically nothing. Together, they added up to a clear message. She was there because having a girlfriend like Chio was good for his image, not because he particularly wanted her company. Hikaru's protector mode registered this as a different kind of danger than it had with Emiko, quieter and slower, but just as real. He found himself sitting across from Chio when she ended up alone at the end of the table, and they began talking the way two people talk when they're both relieved to have somewhere to put their attention. Chio was sharp, observant, and wry in a way she'd been suppressing in Shota's presence because he didn't appreciate it. She had strong opinions about the historical sites they'd visited during the day and expressed them with precision. She was someone who had been making herself smaller to fit inside a relationship that was too small for her. They talked for hours that night, and Chio confessed that she'd been thinking about ending things with Shota for months, but felt trapped by everyone's expectations of them as a couple. The social machinery of their relationship had taken on a life of its own. Everyone expected them to be together. Ending it would be a whole production that she didn't feel she had the energy for. What would happen if you just did it anyway? Hikaru asked. Chio was quiet for a moment. I'd probably feel better than I've felt in a long time, she admitted. The breakup happened the next morning, quick and public in the courtyard of a Kyoto temple. Shota's reaction revealed everything. He was more upset about the public embarrassment than about losing her specifically. He accused her of being ungrateful, of making him look bad, of probably having feelings for someone else, which was more about his ego than any genuine belief. Chio's voice was steady throughout. She'd clearly made her decision before the conversation started. When it was over, she found Hikaru and thanked him quietly. I don't know if that was brave or just overdue, she said. Either way, I feel like I can breathe again. Her interest level started at 30% and climbed steadily in the weeks that followed as she and Hikaru spent more time together. Two people who'd discovered they talked well and thought similarly about most things that mattered. Shota Taniguchi had never forgiven Hikaru for what happened in Kyoto, though the precise shape of what he blamed Hikaru for shifted depending on his mood. Sometimes it was for stealing Chio, though Chio had made her own choice and said as much publicly. Sometimes it was for the general indignity of a nobody like Hikaru ending up surrounded by beautiful girls while Shota's own social standing had taken a hit. The specific grievance didn't matter as much as the fact of the grievance. Shota was also, Hikaru learned through the school grapevine, not above playing dirty. In the weeks after Kyoto, Shota had been quietly spreading stories about Hikaru. Nothing outright false enough to be immediately disproven, but artfully distorted versions of real events. Hikaru had saved Emiko from a stalker? In Shota's version, Hikaru had engineered the situation somehow to look like a hero. Hikaru had supported Chio through a difficult decision. In Shota's version, Hikaru had manipulated a vulnerable girl into leaving a good relationship. The stories were the kind that were just believable enough to make people wonder, and wondering was all Shota needed. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was trying to create uncertainty to make people look at Hikaru and think maybe this guy is running some kind of angle. When the school announced its annual culture festival, Shota saw his opportunity for something more definitive. He strode into the cafeteria during lunch with his entourage trailing behind him, voice projecting across the crowded room as he pointed at Hikaru's table. Watanabe, I'm challenging you to a competition at the culture festival. Best booth wins. Loser has to publicly admit the winner is superior, in front of everyone. Do you accept, or are you too much of a coward? The entire cafeteria fell silent, hundreds of eyes turning to watch. His 7 companions at the table sat with expressions ranging from concerned to furious, but before any of them could speak, a notification appeared in Hikaru's vision. Special quest triggered. Defend your harem. Defeat rival Shota in the Culture Festival competition. Reward Harem King title. Failure penalty. All girls' interest resets to 0 and system deactivates permanently. Hikaru stood up slowly, meeting Shota's arrogant gaze with the kind of steadiness that comes from having actually been through something. From having run across a campus in 60 seconds, from having stood in front of 1,000 people and said what he felt. "I accept your challenge," he said clearly. "But when I win, you're going to apologize to Chio for how you treated her, publicly, in front of everyone." Shota hadn't expected a condition. His smirk flickered. But he'd committed publicly, and backing down now would cost him more than the condition. "Fine. May the best man win." He turned and strode out dramatically, and the cafeteria erupted into excited chatter. The next 2 weeks should have been straightforward preparation, but Shota made sure they weren't. He had advantages that were impossible to ignore. Unlimited funding from his wealthy family, the school's best booth location near the main entrance secured through connections, and a team of followers eager to work for the most popular guy in school. He announced an elaborate cafe booth with professional decorations, hired servers in matching uniforms, and expensive imported sweets. Everything about it was designed to signal that this was a professional operation versus whatever Hikaru could throw together. Hikaru's team settled on simplicity. A small takoyaki booth using his cooking mastery skill to make extraordinary food from basic ingredients. It seemed like the right answer, quality over flash. The 7 girls threw themselves into preparation with the kind of motivation that comes from genuine investment. Asuka managing setup and logistics, Emiko coordinating supplies, Natsumi calculating optimal pricing, Marina designing promotional materials, Ms. Ayame handling adult supervision for the parts that required it, Chio contributing expertise from her father's restaurant business, and Riko bringing boundless energy to everything she touched. What Hikaru didn't know, until 2 days before the festival, was that Shota had been working behind the scenes. One of Emiko's friends, still loyal to Shota's social circle, tipped her off. Shota had been going around to other booths quietly suggesting that his family would look favorably on anyone who avoided taking customers away from his cafe that day. It wasn't a threat exactly, just a suggestion, the kind of suggestion that powerful families make. 3 booths near theirs quietly changed their planned locations to the other side of the grounds. When Emiko told Hikaru about this, his first instinct was frustration, but Natsumi's response was characteristically direct. He made his side of the grounds less appealing. "That concentrates foot traffic. Our location relative to his is actually better now." She showed him the numbers. She was right, Marina had a different take. Let him play his games. When our food is that much better than his expensive imports, everyone who tries both will be talking about it for a week. The preparation sessions became something more than festival planning. Cooking together in Hikaru's tiny apartment kitchen, practicing techniques and arguing cheerfully about presentation, the 7 girls were becoming something that hadn't existed before. Not rivals. Not just people connected through him. Something closer to a team and closer to friends. Festival day arrived with perfect spring weather. Cherry blossoms drifting through the air as students and families flooded the school grounds. Shota's cafe booth was exactly as impressive as promised. Prime real estate near the main entrance. Professional signage, elegant furniture, uniformed servers, and the kind of imported sweets that came in expensive packaging. The line of customers was long from the moment the gates opened. Hikaru's takoyaki booth was tucked into a corner location with handmade decorations. Modest, warm, and quiet at first. Then the first customer tried their takoyaki. She stopped mid-bite. Her eyes went wide. She stood completely still for a moment, in the way people do when something exceeds every expectation they had. Then she bought 5 more orders and turned to the people nearest her and said, with the evangelical certainty of someone who'd experienced a small miracle, "You have to try this right now." The cooking mastery skill had transformed simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Every batch Hikaru cooked came out perfect, consistent in a way that required real skill, and with a depth of flavor that people kept struggling to describe to each other. Word spread through the festival grounds the way good things spread when they're genuinely good, fast and without effort. Within an hour, the line at booth 17 was longer than Shota's cafe. Within 2 hours, it was twice as long. By midday, people were willing to wait 40 minutes. Shota watched this from his professional cafe booth with an expression that progressed from confusion to disbelief to fury. His expensive imported sweets sat largely untouched in their packaging. The professional setup was technically impressive but impersonal in the way that expensive things sometimes are. Nobody was going back for seconds. The 7 girls worked in perfect synchronization, Asuka taking orders with infectious enthusiasm, Emiko handling money with practiced efficiency, Natsumi managing inventory so they never ran short, Marina entertaining waiting customers with her personality, Ms. Ayame providing steady backup, Chio coordinating logistics with restaurant-honed expertise, Riko running supplies with tireless energy. By the end of the 3 festival days, the numbers weren't close. Hikaru's booth had served more customers, generated more revenue, and by every measurable standard, won the competition by an overwhelming margin. When the festival closing ceremony announced the results, Shota stood very still for a long moment, processing the fact that he'd lost. Genuinely, thoroughly lost. Not through bad luck or unfair circumstances, but because quality had beaten money, and a team motivated by something real had outperformed a team motivated by social obligation. "You owe Chio an apology," Hikaru said. When the crowd noise had settled enough to be heard, Shota said it. Short, grudging, and clearly painful to produce, but he said it because he'd made a public bet and the alternative was even worse. Chio received it with the quiet dignity of someone who had already moved past needing it. The victory celebration was cut short when a notification appeared in massive flashing letters that filled Hikaru's entire vision. Final Ultimate Quest, Harem King Ceremony. Publicly confess your feelings to all 7 harem members and kiss each one within 10 minutes on the festival's main stage. Failure. Lose system permanently, and all girls' memories of your relationships will be erased. Reward. Harem King title, permanent system retention, and true love with all members. Hikaru's blood ran cold as the implications sank in. He had to confess publicly, in front of the entire school, to 7 different girls including his teacher. The social fallout potential was enormous. The discomfort was enormous. But the alternative was losing everything he'd built. Watching 7 girls he'd genuinely grown to care about have those feelings simply erased. And that was something he couldn't accept. The Culture Festival's closing ceremony was scheduled to end with the announcement of the Festival King, chosen by popular vote. Hikaru had been voted king, which meant he'd be on stage anyway in front of hundreds of people. The system had arranged this with characteristic precision. As he walked toward the stage, his legs felt like jelly. His 7 companions followed behind, confused about why he'd asked them all to come with him, but trusting him enough to comply. The crowd of students and families gathered in front of the stage, easily 1,000 people, all watching with the expectant curiosity that public ceremonies generate. The countdown appeared in his vision. 9 minutes and 50 seconds. "I have something I need to say," Hikaru began. His voice amplified across the grounds. The crowd fell silent. "These past 2 months have been the craziest, most amazing time of my life, and it's all because of 7 incredible girls who saw something in me worth caring about when I didn't even see it in myself. I owe each of them honesty. So that's what I'm going to give them." He turned to face Asuka first, his childhood friend who had been the one constant through years of being invisible. "Asuka Ishikawa, you've been my best friend since we were kids, and somewhere along the way, that friendship became something more. You make me laugh when I'm sad, you believe in me when I don't believe in myself, and I've been in love with you for longer than I can remember. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." The crowd gasped collectively as Hikaru pulled Asuka close and kissed her. A sweet, brief kiss that made her eyes go wide with shock before she melted into it. When they separated, tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling wider than he'd ever seen. "I've loved you for years, you idiot," she whispered. "I was waiting for you to notice. 8 minutes remaining." Hikaru turned to Emiko. "Emiko Fujimoto, when I first met you, I was terrified of you, and honestly, you gave me good reason to be. But the person I've gotten to know these past months is someone who is brilliant and brave and more real than the image you project. When you let me see who you actually are, I fell completely in love with that person." Emiko's carefully maintained composure crumbled as Hikaru kissed her, and she clung to him with an intensity that surprised them both. "You're the first person who ever saw the real me," she said when they separated. "I love you, Hikaru." 7 minutes left. He turned to Natsumi. "Natsumi Kobayashi, your intelligence is beautiful, your passion for knowledge is inspiring, and your gentle heart is something I treasure. You are not weird or awkward. You are someone who thinks deeply about a world that often prefers people who don't. I am honored that you chose to share that with me." Natsumi burst into tears immediately, her kiss salty with happy crying, and she buried her face in Hikaru's chest afterward. "No one has ever made me feel like that before," she sobbed. "I love you so much." 6 minutes remained. Marina stepped forward with her characteristic boldness, but vulnerability was visible in her eyes for anyone paying attention. Marina Kawasaki, underneath the confidence in the performance and the carefully constructed persona, you are one of the most genuine people I have ever met. The real you, the one who talks about fashion design with technical precision and quiet passion, is someone I find extraordinary. I love how real you actually are. Marina's kiss was fierce and passionate, completely in character, and when she pulled back, she was grinning through happy tears. "Damn right I'm real," she said. "And I love you too, Hikaru Watanabe." 5 minutes left. Ms. Ayami was the riskiest confession, and the crowd somehow understood this before he said a word. A shift in the quality of attention as he turned toward her. "Ayame Nakamura, I know this is complicated. I know what the rules are and I know what my position is. But you told me once that honesty matters, and I think you deserve honesty. You are intelligent, caring, and genuine in ways that have meant more to me than you know. I love you." "And I meant what I said about waiting," the crowd murmured with shock. Miss Ayami stepped forward anyway, accepting the kiss with tears in her eyes, and she whispered against his lips, "We'll figure out the complicated parts together." 4 minutes remained. He turned to Chiyo. "Chiyo Yamamoto, you showed me what it looks like to choose yourself even when it's hard. You walked away from something comfortable because it wasn't right, and you did it with more grace than most people manage. I want to be someone who is always worth that kind of courage. I love you." Chiyo's kiss was gentle and certain, and when they separated, she was crying quietly. "You already are that person," she said. "I love you, Hikaru." 3 minutes left. Finally, Riko, bouncing slightly on her feet with barely contained energy. "Riko Suzuki, your enthusiasm and your pure heart remind me every day that joy doesn't require complicated reasons. You make me want to be the hero you already think I am. I love your energy and your kindness and your unwavering belief in good things." Riko practically jumped into his arms for the kiss, her whole body vibrating with excitement, and when they parted, she was already bouncing on her toes. "Senpai loves me. I love you too. I love you so much." The final notification appeared. "Ultimate quest complete. Harem King title awarded. System permanently retained. True love achieved with all 7 members. Congratulations, Hikaru Watanabe. You are now officially the Harem King." The aftermath of the public confession was exactly as chaotic as it deserved to be. Half the school thought Hikaru was a legend. The other half thought he was insane, or running some kind of elaborate scheme, or both. Social media received the videos of the confession immediately and distributed them with the efficient enthusiasm the internet reserves for genuinely unusual things. By the next morning, the video had been watched by people who had no connection to the school at all. The administration addressed the Ms. Ayami situation professionally and with more sensitivity than Hikaru had dared to hope for. Ms. Ayami met with the principal, was honest about the fact that her feelings were real and that she and Hikaru had agreed to maintain professional boundaries until after his graduation. And the situation was resolved with strict guidelines and a commitment from both of them to honor the position she was in. It wasn't comfortable, but it was manageable. Managing a harem of 7 proved exactly as complicated as the jokes about harems always suggested, and nothing at all like the jokes at the same time. The complexity wasn't dramatic or romantic. It was logistical, scheduling, communication, making sure everyone felt genuinely valued rather than slotted into a rotation. The girls established a group chat that Hikaru was not a member of, which he thought was probably healthy. They handled things between themselves more effectively than he could have managed anyway. Jealousy still flared occasionally, particularly between Asuka and Emiko, who had the longest history with him from different directions, and both considered their connection to be foundational in ways the others weren't. They'd had one genuine argument about it that Hikaru had not been present for, and had apparently reached some kind of understanding that involved both of them agreeing he was lucky they were reasonable people. He chose not to press for details. Shota transferred to a different school the following month, which everyone agreed was probably the best outcome for everyone, including Shota. 3 months after the festival, as cherry blossoms bloomed again marking the beginning of a new school year, Hikaru sat on the school roof surrounded by his harem of 7, all of them talking and laughing together with the comfortable ease of people who have actually gotten to know each other. The bro system interface still appeared occasionally with minor quests, but the pressure was gone. A final notification appeared, different from all the others. Congratulations, Hikaru Watanabe. You have completed the bro system's ultimate objective. The question now is not what the system will do next, but what you will. The tools were given to you. The choices were always yours. The love you built is real. What you do with it is up to you alone. Good luck, Harem King. Hikaru looked around at the 7 girls who'd changed his life completely, each one remarkable in ways he was still discovering, and he didn't have a neat answer to the system's question. Maybe that was okay. Some situations didn't resolve into something simple, and pretending they did would be dishonest. For now, surrounded by laughter and the warm spring sunshine and 7 people who'd chosen to trust him with something real, Hikaru Watanabe was exactly where he wanted to be. The lonely loser he'd been just months ago felt like someone from a different life. Not because the system had changed him, but because being given a reason to try had revealed something that had been there the whole time, waiting for him to stop being afraid of it. As Asuka leaned her head on his shoulder, and Emiko held his hand, and the others chatted around them with the easy familiarity of real friendship, Hikaru smiled. It was just the beginning.